In the bustling port city of Charleston during the 1820s, a place where wealth and cruelty intertwined on every cobblestone street, lived an enslaved man named Moses Carter. From childhood, Moses displayed a rare gift with his hands, an instinct for carpentry that seemed almost divine. His master, William Barrett, one of the most arrogant and tyrannical plantation owners in the region, recognized this talent and quickly forced Moses in his service, constructing and maintaining his grand estate. To Barrett, Moses was not a craftsman but property, a tool to be used and discarded at will. Yet while Barrett flaunted his mansion at gatherings, delighting in the admiration of Charleston's elite, Moses studied the very beams and rafters he built, committing every joint, nail, and fault line to memory. Though his body was shackled, his mind roamed freely, and within the silence of his labor, a seed of resistance began to grow. Life under Barrett was suffocating. Known for his temper, Barrett often drank himself into violent rages, unleashing cruelty upon both his slaves and his own family. Moses, despite his quiet demeanor, endured constant humiliation, beatings, and backbreaking labor. But unlike others who broke under such torment, he carried within him a patience sharpened by necessity. Every day, he worked on the mansion, refining his knowledge of its structure. He learned where the timber was strongest, where the nails bent under strain, and where the roof creaked when storms rolled in from the Atlantic. Slowly, deliberately, Moses began to imagine the house not as a monument to Barrett's pride, but as a fragile shell, something that could be turned against its owner. With each year that passed, his understanding deepened, and his plan, though unspoken, became clearer. Moses did not rush toward vengeance. Instead, he waited, sharpening his mind as others sharpen blades. When Barrett ordered renovations, Moses made them, but he did so with precision only he understood. Beams were joined at angles designed to strain under heavy weight. Rafters were subtly thinned where no eye could notice. Nails were driven in places where wood would split over time. To the casual observer, the work was flawless. To Moses, it was the careful weaving of a trap. He told no one, not even those who trusted him most, for he knew a whisper could bring death to everyone involved. In silence, with chisel and hammer, he turned Barrett's mansion into a coffin waiting to be sealed. Every blow of the mallet was not just labor, but rebellion, a quiet act of war against the man who claimed ownership over his very life. The night of reckoning arrived with a storm that seemed to shake Charleston to its core. Rain battered the city in sheets, thunder cracked across the heavens, and wind howled through the harbor like the cries of the enslaved. Inside the Barrett mansion, William sat in his study, brandy glass in hand, mocking the storm's fury as if daring God himself. But above him, the roof moaned under the downpour, its weakened beams straining with each gust of wind. Moses, standing in the shadows, heard the sound he had been waiting years to hear, a deep groan from the rafters, a death rattle in the wood. And then it happened. With a thunderous roar, the roof gave way, collapsing inward with terrifying force. Beams splintered like bones, stone and timber cascaded downward, and William Barrett, still clutching his glass, was buried alive beneath the ruins of his pride. The storm swallowed his cries, and in moments silence returned. Moses did not linger to savor his victory. He knew that discovery meant death, and so he fled into the night as the storm raged on. His feet carried him swiftly through the muddy streets of Charleston, past taverns and alleys, until he reached the docks where ships rocked violently in the harbor. There, he found passage on a vessel bound for Haiti, the world's first free black republic, where enslaved men had risen in revolution and cast off their chains. As the ship sailed into the vast Atlantic, Moses stood at its stern, watching the faint glow of Charleston disappear behind sheets of rain. His heart was heavy, torn between the pain of what he had endured and the knowledge that he had struck a blow not just for himself, but for every man and woman still bound in chains. In Haiti, Moses found a freedom he had never imagined. His skill as a carpenter earned him respect, and he quickly became known for building structures that stood firm against storms. Yet for all his success, he remained a quiet figure, never boasting of his past, never speaking of the night that changed his fate. To his apprentices, he was a stern but fair teacher, a man who insisted on perfection in every cut of wood, every measured angle. What they never knew was that every demand for precision came from memory, the memory of a mansion built to deceive, of beams that carried hidden weakness, of a roof designed not to shelter but to fall. He carried that night with him always, not as guilt, but as a reminder of the power of patience, intelligence, and resilience. Back in Charleston, Barrett's death became the subject of rumor and speculation. His family insisted the storm had destroyed the house, but others whispered that something darker had occurred. Among the enslaved community, the story of Moses spread like wildfire. It was told in hushed tones at night, passed from ear to ear as both warning and inspiration. To them, Moses was no longer just a man. He was a symbol, proof that even under the heaviest chains, a mind sharpened by suffering could bend the world toward justice. Children grew up hearing of the carpenter who had buried his master alive, and though no official record carried his name, his legend lived on in the hearts of the oppressed. As years passed, Moses' story transformed into myth. In Haiti, he was remembered as a master builder, a man who gave his skills to a free nation. In Charleston, his name was whispered like a secret prayer, a reminder that tyranny could fall under the weight of its own arrogance. And across oceans, in abolitionist circles, fragments of his tale were carried and retold as a parable of courage. Moses Carter, the enslaved carpenter of Charleston, became more than flesh and blood. He became the embodiment of resistance itself. His master's mansion had stood as a monument to cruelty, but Moses had turned it into a grave. And though history may never etch his name into grand books, among those who longed for freedom, his story endured, alive in every whispered retelling of the man who used timber and storm to bury his master, and in doing so, built his own liberation. Moses turned timber into justice, and his story lives on through us. Tap like if you believe his courage should never be forgotten. Share this with someone who values hidden history, and subscribe so you never miss the next chapter of Legends history try to bury.